One of our other sessions looked at the mining sector, one of Australia's economic backbones. One of the other backbones is really our bioeconomy, our food industry, our paper industry, etc. But what does the bioeconomy look like in a circular economy? Tim, Bronwyn and John will talk about this in some depth.
Well, we're here to talk about the bioeconomy, and we had a great session this morning at the conference on just that topic. And for those who aren't aware, the bioeconomy is an economy where it's essentially run on the production of biological materials from animals, plants, from the oceans, and it is sustainable within that context. And it's often contrasted with a fossil-based economy where the economy is underpinned by fossil energy rather than bio-based energy and materials.
Yeah, fossil energy and materials, yep. Yep, so I guess a couple of themes came out from this morning that are recurring themes in this space, and I guess that's probably the area we were thinking of talking to. One of them is materials and the feedstocks and the products that can be made from those feedstocks and the diversity of those, and also then some of the unintended consequences of redirecting material supplies from where they're currently utilised in whatever form, even if it's poorly utilised, into other streams and the unintended consequences that have to be taken into account.
Yeah, so really the cascading use of these materials is what we were thinking.
So I've heard, this is quite a few years ago now, where the people who make particle board and chipboard in some countries, all of a sudden a lot of their feedstocks started getting diverted off into waste to energy plants because there was a demand for green energy. And we have a lot of projects in Queensland and Australia here being proposed for sugarcane waste and bagasse. What do we think the right in maybe policy and market settings are to allow the technologies to play out and compete for feedstock materials in this area?
Yeah, so one of the interesting things that came up today, and certainly the Queensland Government is taking this into account, is needing to do this integration rather than doing siloed approaches to individual technologies. So it's really important to understand how, if you take that feedstock for one particular use, what it means in terms of the economy in that region, and also some of the spillover effects, like some of the nutrient runoff which is associated with sugarcane. And if you're going to increase use there, what impact does it have on the environment? So again, complexities that need to be taken into account, and understanding that you don't just want legislation, you also want to understand and frame and map the integration of processes.
And once you've done that, also to work out what the actual market potential could be.
For any of the products.
Yeah, because if you can't actually appropriate the value to that product, then is there really a point in doing it? Are you using energy to try and generate something that actually isn't needed? That can be an issue to consider. But at the moment, if I understand correctly, a lot of the bagasse is actually just burnt.
Yes, it is, but that's a critical part of the operations of the mills.
Okay, so they have to put that back in. So if you're looking at diverting some of the bagasse for other uses, there tends to be this limit where you don't want more than 50% diverted, because it goes into it drives the whole mill. So this is part of the balance where you've got to understand the local economies. Exactly.
But that effect may be a temporary effect, in the long sense of the word, because there is a steam requirement, there's a substantial electricity requirement, and I know that the price for electricity now is good, and so there's a real big incentive to burn the bagasse for green power. But maybe if the other renewables start to become more competitive, that may be able to free up more of that bagasse for other uses. We had an interesting situation with that displacement of feedstocks and things, and just getting people to understand how we do the environmental modelling. We had an example where we looked at the use of molasses being used in ethanol, and it was, of course, when these things were started 20 years ago, they were considered waste products and had very low value, but now they're globally traded commodities and they go into the production of MSG and all sorts of things. And so in the life cycle study we did last year, the consequences of using them in ethanol was that we had to grow more cassava in Southeast Asia to feed monosodium glutamate plants. And the industry were looking at that and sort of shocked that we would suddenly account this thing that their molasses has never actually been used for, but is a sort of consequence of a live market, competitive market for products.
Yep.
But if I understand correctly, in Queensland there's also a lot of interest in the algae, the blue economy, if you like, blue
yes.
bioeconomy.
So there's a lot of algae research. I think we're still, it's that harvesting of a high-value product economically from the algae, which is still the barrier. So, but I know that Per Schenk and some of the other groups are doing, and JCU, they've got a very good, very active algae program up there, and your macro and your microalgae.
Right, right. But this is going towards biofuels or biochemicals, or?
Originally it was just going towards biofuels, but I think they're increasingly looking at diverse products. As with most of these things, you need to have your cascade, your value cascade to justify the business case. And again, it's also transport, and making sure you're not transporting water. You don't want to have low density materials, and you've got to have your local scale. So you've got to have sufficient quantity in the local region to justify an industry.
Yeah, I think I think everyone expected the oil price not to sit around the $40, $50 US a barrel for too long. I thought that was an aberration, and we're waiting for it to recover. But I think now, the biofuels industry is having to rethink that is a long to medium term reality, and so if they're going to produce something, they need to be able to produce at that price, and that has pushed a number of the technologies to go to higher value products and not target the biofuels.
Exactly. Yep. That's the equation.